Odysseus' journey back to Ithaca after defeating the Trojans in the war. And if you guys have seen the movie Troy, you'll know that Sean Bean, the great Sean Bean, played our protagonist. And as would be fitting, one does not simply make a single video on the Odyssey. So we will be reading this hefty 60-page book. I thought it was, I think it will be just as entertaining and sleep-inducing, relaxing for you as it was for me when I started reading it. And really, I just want to get right into it. So, the Odyssey is, for me, it's a very, nostalgic, because I love the movie, but I also was forced to read the Iliad and the Odyssey in high school, which turned out to be quite the blessing. And roughly, just so you know, the Odyssey is the epilogue, the ending. Apparently there were actually many more myths, but in this panoply of ancient, far ancient Greek mythology. So, the Odyssey was the journey home for Odysseus, the long 10-year arduous journey home after he had helped Achilles and Agamemnon and Menelaus from Greece defeat the great Hector and his cowardly younger brother Paris. At least that's how it was portrayed in the movies. I forget honestly whether he was a warrior, but he stole Helen of Troy nonetheless. Helen of Greece originally, and that's what sparked the war. So, hope you enjoy it, and here's part one. So here we are, the adventures of Odysseus. Due date, April 16th, 2002. And briefly, he apparently had no trouble sailing to Ithaca, but as the ominous actual thunder outside foreshadows, he will indeed have some trials and tribulations in order to get back to Ithaca, to his homeland. And for those of you keeping score at home, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We have 12 chapters. And so our main characters are the immortals, and the mortals, it's an easy way to break them up. And we have Athena, goddess of wisdom, Zeus's daughter, Zeus, the god of gods.
And we have Poseidon, the god
of the sea, Zeus's brother. And we have Aeolus, god of the winds.
Then we have Hermes, the messenger of the gods. Hyperion, the sun god.
Then we have Circe, the goddess of enchantment. Calypso, the goddess of silence. And lastly, Polyphemus, the Cyclops, or the son of Poseidon.
And for any of you basic lit buffs out there, I guess, apparently the Cyclops is a very phallic representation of, oh wow, we got rain. Real rain, guys.
Polyphemus is a very phallic representation. The Cyclops, the one-eyed giant, that represents the powerful drive of a very singular, instinctual motivation.
And then for the mortals, we have Odysseus, our protagonist, the main guy, son of Laertes, king of
Ithaca.
His wife, Penelope, his son, Telemachus, and then Menelaus, the instigator, former husband of Helen, instigator of the entire Trojan War.
Yes, the thunder, of course, once again indicates, wow, there's been a lot of serendipitous timings with thunder tonight.
And of course we have Helen, the theme around which, the scapegoat, if you will, for giving Menelaus and Agamemnon a reason to go try to sack, and successfully doing so, sacking Troy. And then we have Agamemnon, Menelaus' older, more powerful brother, I believe.
The leader of the Greeks.
And then we have Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous, king of the Phaeacians, and Eumaeus, the swineherd, loyal to
Odysseus. Chapter 1. The Lotus Eaters.
The city of Troy was in flames. Odysseus looked back and laughed. For 10 bitter years, the Greek army had laid siege
to the city. Now at last, they had done what they came to do. The walls of Troy, built by god Poseidon himself, were tumbled to the ground, and Poseidon was Poseidon himself.
Paris, prince of Troy, who had dared to steal away the beautiful Helen from King Menelaus,
was dead. Now Odysseus and his comrades could go home.
It was not much, perhaps, Odysseus' home, Ithaca, a poor, bare, low-lying island far out to the west. The island of the setting sun, and there it is right there, nearly the furthest west in all of Greece. But every man loves the land where he is born, and no place on earth was dearer to Odysseus than Ithaca. For all those years, that the Greeks had warred against Troy, his heart had been yearning for his home. So the soil of Ithaca may be thin and starved, but it grows true sons. Odysseus had left one behind, Telemachus. He often thought of his son and his wife Penelope, and longed to be with them. In truth, he had never wanted to leave them. What did he care if Paris had taken a fancy to Menelaus's wife, Helen? When Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother, who led the Greek army against Troy, came to collect Odysseus to join the expedition, he pretended to be mad. He yoked a horse and a bull together to plow the seashore and sow it with salt. But they pushed his son Telemachus into his path. Odysseus swerved to avoid him, and they saw through the act. Odysseus, you shall plan for us, said King Agamemnon, for your cunning may indeed win where strength fails. Cunning indeed was needed, where strength and bravery of two sides were so finely balanced. It was Odysseus who came up with the plan to deceive the Trojans into opening their city gates, so letting the finest Greek soldiers into the city, concealed inside a wooden horse. Then Troy was put to the fire and the sword. Of all the leaders of Greeks, Odysseus was the most eager to be on his way. He called his men, and they set sail while the sky behind them still burned red. Not with the sunset, but in fact with the fire, as you can see, the great fires of the sacking and razing and pillaging and plundering and destruction of Troy. But bad luck was with them from the start. Great Zeus, who wields the thunder and lightning, sent such storms that their ships bucked and plunged in the waves like frightened horses. The rain scoured all color from the world until they could not tell sea from sky. The wind tore their sails to shreds. There was nothing they could do but pull for shore. There they lay, weary and sick at heart, for 2 days and nights, while the storm blew itself out. On the third day, they set sail once more, only to be dragged, caught by the fierce currents that pulled them far, far off course, dragged south by the relentless wind in waves for 10 whole days, until at last they reached land. They went ashore and soon found fresh water. Odysseus sent a party of men inland to find out who lived in this hot, far-off country. None of them returned. None of his men returned. At last Odysseus himself went in search of them. In a clearing he found one of his men. He was laying on his back, humming a tune. Odysseus recognized the melody It was an old Ithacan lullaby,
such as every mother croons to her baby.
The man hardly seemed to recognize Odysseus. Instead, he held out some fruit, saying, "Here, have some." His voice
Was slurred, and juice from the ripe fruit was dribbling down his chin. Odysseus slapped his cheek to bring him back around. Little by little, the story came out.
This was the land of the Lotus Eaters, so called because their only food was the honeyed lotus fruit. They had offered their fruit to Odysseus's men. Whoever tasted it once lived only to taste
It again. Lived only to taste it again.
Odysseus tried to reason with the man. "Don't you want to go home?"
I'm already home, the man mumbled. I'm already home.
With his mouth full of fruit, he began to slip once more into his waking dream, and nothing Odysseus did or said could stir him from it. Odysseus returned to the ships and fetched more men, cautioning them not to eat
The lotus fruit. Do not eat the lotus fruit.
They dragged their blank-eyed, smiling companions back to the ship, one by one.
By one, by one, by one by one, by one.
They tied them up and fled from that deadly land where the lotus fruit traps men in a trance of childhood. As the oars dipped once more into the whitening sea, they tried to shut their ears from the piteous cries of those men who had eaten
The lotus fruit. Okay, guys, that was chapter 1, the Lotus Eaters. Next, we'll venture to the new island of Greece, where Odysseus and his men find themselves in the cave of the Cyclops. I really hope you enjoyed this. I'd like to read all 12 chapters. So let me know what you thought. And if you guys like it, perhaps I'll read 2 chapters in the next episode. But I never can quite tell what you guys will enjoy most. So I have a slew of other books I'd like to get to soon. And if this isn't something you guys enjoyed that much, then I'll simply start talking about Mesopotamia and other fascinating science, space, astronomy, history books that I have. So don't worry, there's no shortage of interesting things to fall asleep to here. I'd like to give a special shout out to Tirar Adeguayo for Dr. Andrew Michaels for pinning my comment and showing so much support for the channel recently. He's a fantastic, brilliant, creative artist in his own right, and I'm honored that he chose to support the channel. So go give him a like or a sub if you aren't already, which I find that hard to believe. And also shout out to ASMarctica for reminding me that libraries so I'm going to try to knock out 2 chapters, and we're going to just press forward through this epic journey. And let me just try to pull off a nice transition into the map.
So last time we were coming back from Troy, the fall of Troy, and Odysseus remembers trying to get to Ithaca. But the winds pushed him all the way out to what looks like an island near Carthage on North Africa. The island of the Lotus Eaters, So, he had to coerce his men to come back because they were so polluted with these tempting morsels, the fruits of the lotus, that they had forgotten. Their memory had been erased almost. They had forgotten what their purpose was, and they just wanted to bask in the sweet flavor and temporary pleasures of the lotus. So, we are now going to the cave of the Cyclops. Here is our main characters. Odysseus, his wife, his son. The leaders of the Greeks. Agamemnon. And of course his brother and the cause of the entire war. The cause of the war was Helen of Troy. And then the main gods, Athena, Zeus, Poseidon, Zeus's daughter, Zeus's brother, god of the sea, Aeolus, god of the winds, Hermes, messenger, Hyperion, which I thought the sun god was Apollo, but perhaps they are different facets of the different sides of the sun. They represent maybe different things. And last, the most relevant part to us here is the Circe, the goddess of enchantment, Calypso, the goddess of silence. And the most important for tonight's episode is Polyphemus, a Cyclops, the son of Poseidon, which kind of gives you a personality analysis of Poseidon, maybe. It's this very phallic symbol, holding a phallic thing. One eye has very focused attention, not very versatile, is extremely passionate about one thing.
And let's find out what that thing is.
Alright. And so Odysseus and his men sailed on sad and weary until they reached land again. They reached land again.
Although they did not know it, they had come to the country of the Cyclops.
These huge, fierce beings have only one eye each, right in the center of their forehead. They do not farm, relying instead on the goodwill of Zeus, whose thunderbolts they make. They make Zeus's thunder. So although they neither plow nor sow, their crops still grow. They can live in caves high in the hills, and each of them makes his own laws. So they don't abide by anybody else's laws, and as a consequence of that, perhaps they don't work together very well. The crews beached their boats in a fine harbor, close to a spring of fresh water and a grove of black poplars.
They slaughtered some goats and ate and drank, then slept at ease in this delightful spot.
When the first flush of dawn was in the sky, Odysseus picked 12 of his men and set out to explore. They climbed until they came to a cave with a courtyard of wood and stone. It was clearly the home of
Some shepherd, clearly the home of a shepherd, for there were sheep and goats in pens, and also many huge cheeses in baskets.
"Let us take as many of these cheeses as we can carry, drive the animals onto the boats, and set sail before this shepherd returns," said Polites, one of Odysseus's most trusted companions. From the looks of it, he must be a giant.
But Odysseus replied, No, let's wait and greet him when he returns from his pastures. He may be master of all this land, and if he knows what is due from the host to guest, he will give us gifts.
So they made themselves at home in the Cyclops' cave. They lit a fire and killed a sheep. After they had offered the gods the portion due to them, they ate. At last they heard the heavy tread of the Cyclops.
Boom, 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 boom.
Whose name was Polyphemus. From a distance, he looked more like some vast mountain crag than flesh and blood. Their courage failed, and they hid in a dark corner of the cave, meaning to creep out when they could. But when Polyphemus came home, driving his flocks and carrying a huge bundle of wood to make a fire, he closed the entrance behind him with an enormous boulder, so big that 24-wheeled wagons would be unable to shift it. Then he settled down to milk the sheep and the goats. Something troubled the Cyclops at his work, a strange scent in the air. He began to sniff the air, and searching the cave, he soon discovered Odysseus and his men cowering in the corner "Who are you, and where do you come from?" he roared.
"We are Greeks, come from the sack of Troy," said Odysseus. "Show us, we beg, the hospitality due to wayfaring guests, as you respect the gods. For Zeus himself looks after travelers."
"And I look after myself," replied Polyphemus. "We Cyclops do not fear the gods, for we are as strong as they are. Nevertheless, I may choose to spare you. Tell me, how did you come here? Did my father Poseidon allow you to travel freely over the waves? Is your ship moored nearby?"
Odysseus, guessing that the giant would destroy their ships and murder the crew, replied,
"Our ship was dashed against the rocks by great Poseidon and sank. My companions and I are the only survivors." Polyphemus asked no further questions. Instead, he reached down and plucked 2 men from the huddled group. He swung them by their ankles and dashed their brains out against the wall. He then tore them limb from limb and devoured them raw like a ravening animal. The others looked on in terror. Polyphemus washed his meal down with milk and went to sleep. The giant now sleeps. As the Cyclops lay snoring on the floor, Elpenor, the youngest of Odysseus's men, urged Odysseus to kill him. "Slide your sword in between his ribs just there. That should finish him off." "It would finish us off, too," replied Odysseus. "For how could we escape? Only the Cyclops is strong enough to budge the rock that seals us in here. No. We must wait and see what the new day brings." At dawn, Polyphemus rose and made a gruesome breakfast of 2 more of Odysseus's companions. He gathered his flocks and set out for the pastures, closing the rock door behind him. Odysseus and the remaining 8 men were left to tremble in the cave, waiting for nightfall and the return of the Cyclops. At last Odysseus spoke. "It may be that this Cyclops will eat us all, and that our only choice is between a swift or a slow death. But it may be that we can fool this giant. I have with me a goatskin full of dark wine, given me by the priest of Apollo. This wine is so potent that it should be diluted with 20 parts spring water. I shall offer it to the Cyclops tonight, and if he drinks it, he will fall into a fuddled sleep. Then we must make our move." Polyphemus had left a great cudgel of olive wood, lying in the cave, so big that it could have served as the mast of a ship. Odysseus cut off a length of this and sharpened the end with his sword. He then The Cyclops gorged himself once more on human flesh. He then sat down to drink some milk, and Odysseus went up to him, saying, "Cyclops, you have caused my companions to drink the black wine of death. If you are to feast on men's flesh, you should at least send them on their way with honor. I have here a goatskin of fine wine, which I had brought to you as a gift. Let me pour you a bowl full." The Cyclops drained the bowl in a single swallow. Wiping his great blubbery lips, he said, "Tell me your name, little man, for I wish to make you a present in return for this wine. Pour me some more."
3 times Odysseus filled the bowl, and 3 times the Cyclops drank it down. At last the fumes from the wine began to fog his head, and then Odysseus said, "You ask my name, and I will tell you. It is nobody."
"Well, nobody, I will eat you last. That is my gift to you," replied Polyphemus. As the wine overcame him, he sank to the floor. His great head lolled to one side, and as sleep tugged him under, he belched forth a vile mouthful of wine and human flesh. Odysseus and his men took the stake that they had made out of the olive wood and laid it into the fire until it was red hot. Begging courage of the gods, 4 of the men took the stake and plunged it into the giant's single eye. Odysseus above twisted it to and fro to drill it home. The eye bubbled and hissed with a sound like a smith tempering iron in cold water. Polyphemus awoke, shrieking in agony. He plucked the stake from his forehead and hit out wildly. But Odysseus and his men could easily dodge the blind, blundering giant. Polyphemus's screams resounded through the hills, waking the other Cyclops in their high caves. They all rushed to help him. When they arrived outside the cave, he called, "What is the matter? Who is attacking you?" they called.
And Polyphemus replied,
"Nobody is attacking me. Nobody has tried to kill me."
The other Cyclops were indeed puzzled by this answer. But every time they asked Polyphemus who was to blame, he just wailed,
"Nobody. Nobody. If nobody is attacking you, there's nothing we can do. You must ask your father Poseidon to help if you are suffering some torment of the gods."
And the Cyclops went away.
Polyphemus groped around the cave for Odysseus and his men, but he could not catch them. So he pushed the boulder away from the entrance and sat there himself with his great hands outstretched to catch
anyone trying to escape, including nobody.
And when the dawn came, the sheep began to file out of the cave, as they were accustomed to do, and Polyphemus felt each one as it passed. But crafty Odysseus had tied them together in groups of 3, so that a man could cling beneath the belly of the middle one and go undetected. And so his 6 remaining men, his companions, escaped from the cave. When it was Odysseus' turn, there was only one ram left, a big, fat creature that was the best in all the flock. Odysseus clutched the shaggy fleece tightly, and with his face pressed to its rank-smelling belly, sent it walking towards the giant. As it passed, Polyphemus hugged it close to him. "It's you, my beauty," he said. "Normally you are the proudest of all and the first to leave the cave. Today you have lingered out of sadness for your master. But I promise you nobody shall never escape me. Now join your fellows in the meadow."
And he let the ram go.
Once clear of the cave, Odysseus and his men drove the sheep down to the ships and made haste to put out for the sea, knowing that the Cyclops made no boats and could not follow them into the salt waves. When they were the length of a man's shout from the shore, Odysseus cried, "Cyclops, are you listening? It is I, nobody. You scoffed at Zeus and the hospitality due to a guest. Now you must suffer for your evil ways." At this the giant was so outraged that he hurled the massive boulder from the cave entrance at the ship. It landed in the sea with such a tremendous crash that the waves from it drove the ship back onto shore.
As Odysseus and his men rowed frantically out to the sea again, Elpenor pleaded with Odysseus not to anger the Cyclops further. Next time, he said, he may aim better.
But Odysseus was too proud to remain silent. "Cyclops," he shouted, "if anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, Prince of Ithaca. It was my wits that breached the walls of Troy, though they were built by Poseidon himself, and it was I who made a fool of you."
And here we see the beautiful, really beautiful portrait of Odysseus and his men. Of course, Odysseus going last, being the bravest, being their leader, clinging to the underside, the bellies of the sheep. As they walk, 3 by 3, 3 by 3, 3 by 3, and finally, with Odysseus clinging under the belly of the Cyclops' pride, ram, they go past the great Cyclops. This really is a beautiful little portrait here. So, if you're asleep, just know that it's something you missed. No, I hope you'll watch it next time, because this is really a cool scene. I enjoy it. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 19 sheep. Just counting sheep for you guys, that's all. Okay. And here we see Odysseus and his men rowing past, trying to dodge the great boulders, actual mountain
So Polyphemus let out a terrible groan. "It is my fate that this has happened. A wise man foretold that I would lose my sight at the hands of Odysseus. But I thought Odysseus would be a great hero, strong and tall, not a puny weakling like you." Then he stretched out his arms towards the sea, calling the great Poseidon, Earth Shaker, Lord of the waves, "hear me. If I am your son, and if you are my father, grant me this. May Odysseus never see his home again, or if he does, let him come alone and friendless to a house of trouble and sorrow."
That was his prayer, and Poseidon heard it.
And then Polyphemus threw another great rock. This one fell just short of the ship, and its waves sent Odysseus and his men out to sea. There, Odysseus sacrificed the ram on which he had escaped, and prayed to Zeus for his help. But Zeus would do nothing to turn aside the anger of his brother, Poseidon. And so ends the chapter on the island of the Cyclops.
Welcome back. So, I see you made it this far into the journey, the Odyssey. And, well, I'm just glad you're with me, because it's getting weird. So, you made it this far. You've made it out of Troy, across the violent seas, into the island of the Lotus Eaters, while still maintaining to remember your goal and purpose, in spite of the sublime, dreamlike states that the Lotus puts you in. You made it out of the Cyclops. You eluded the violent grip and grasp of the Cyclops. And now, with a bounty of sheep and a sacrifice of the head ram to the gods, you try to find your way to Ithaca. Almost forgot. That Lotus was really good. Once more, we are in the Odyssey. It would be like my traditional
So once again, we are escaping the fall of Troy. Or leaving it, rather, because we caused it. And, being with Odysseus, we had the Isle of the Lotus Eaters. Then we, narrowly, using our wits and courage, escaped and eluded the deadly grasp of the Cyclops. Now we set sail for Ithaca once again, but I don't think we're out of the fire yet. And so once again, guys, we have Odysseus, his wife and son, who we have yet to see. Menelaus, Helen, Agamemnon. We have yet to see, well, anybody over here, except Odysseus. Okay. And we have the main god, ruler of the gods, Zeus, his brother Poseidon, daughter Athena, and then the god of the wind. And then we have the messenger god, Hermes, and for our story, the sun god, Hyperion. And for very, very important to our story today is the goddess of enchantment, Circe. Calypso, the goddess of silence. And we already know the Cyclops, Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon. Okay, so there's Odysseus plowing Ithaca, despite going to Troy, burning Troy, wandering upon one of his stoned men. His soldiers turned hippie at the island of the Lotus Eaters. Here they are, happily, blissfully unaware of the dangers they were about to meet on the island of the Cyclops. And here is the danger they met. That's crazy. He actually ate, I think it was a total of 6 of his men by bashing them up against the wall. Okay, there they are escaping. After they got him drunk and stabbed out his eye to catch you guys up who missed it. And here they are finally escaping in their boats. As even though he was blind, Odysseus was full of hubris and pride and calling out, taunting him. And so the Cyclops, Polyphemus says, "Great Poseidon, Earth-shaker, Lord of the waves, hear me if I am your son, and if you are my father, grant me this. May Odysseus never see his home again, or, if he does, let him come alone and friendless to a house of trouble and sorrow." And that was his prayer. And Poseidon heard it. And Odysseus then sacrificed a ram, the ram on which he had escaped, and prayed to Zeus. But Zeus would do nothing to turn aside the anger of his brother Poseidon. The goddess of enchantment. Next, Odysseus and his ships came to the island home of Aeolus, who is the warden of the winds. His island floats on the surface of the sea, and all around it is a wall of bronze. Aeolus lives there with his wife and 12 children, 6 sons and 6 daughters, who are married to one another, and they spend all their time feasting. For a whole month Aeolus entertained Odysseus and his men, and questioned them closely about the fall of Troy. At last Odysseus patiently asked Aeolus for his help on the journey home. Without it, we will never see Ithaca again, for the gods are against us. So Aeolus gave Odysseus an ox-hide bag tied with a silver cord. In it were all the winds. All the winds. All the winds. To be let out as they were needed, except for the west wind, which Aeolus commanded to give Odysseus safe passage home. And here we are apparently with the 6 daughters, 6 sons, and his wife, feasting on his floating island with the bronze walls as they watch Odysseus depart. At first all went well. After 9 days and 9 nights, the shore of Ithaca came into sight. Odysseus, who had been keeping lookout all this time, fell asleep. Sure that his long journey home was nearly over, and his crew began to mutter and whisper among themselves. "He's coming home rich enough," said one. "Aye," said another, "he has a ship full of spoils from Troy, while we have nothing. And now he has a big bag full of gold and silver from Aeolus," said another. "Let's open it," said the first. And so the foolish and greedy men undid the silver cord around the ox-hide bag and let out the winds. At once a fierce tempest arose, buffeting the ships with merciless fury. One by one they foundered. They sank to the bottom of the sea, and the waves closed over them. Soon only Odysseus' ship was left. The warring winds blew it all the way back to Aeolus' island. He greeted Odysseus with amazement. "What are you doing back here?" he asked. "Did I not give you command of the winds to see you home safely?" "You did," answered Odysseus, "but my companions have betrayed me. They opened the ox-hide bag and then let loose the tempest. I beg you, gather the winds together again so I can go home." "The gods are truly against you," said Aeolus. "I cannot help you again. Go, get out of here, you silly Greek." Odysseus, heavy at heart, turned once more to the open sea. No friendly wind filled his sails this time. Instead, the men had to pull on the oars against both wind and wave. And all the time they knew, no matter what course they steered, that Poseidon was waiting for them. So Odysseus and his men eventually made landfall off the island of Ithaca, the home of Circe, the goddess of enchantment. When they had beached the ship, Odysseus climbed a nearby hill to see what he could. As he stood gazing over the island, a stag crossed his path on its way to drink from the river. Odysseus flung his spear and killed it. "Men," he cried, "our luck is with us once again. Come, let us feast, and tomorrow we shall explore the island." Next day Odysseus divided his crew into two parties. He commanded the first, his cousin Eurylochus the second. They drew lots as to who should go first, and Eurylochus won. So he and 22 men set off inland. Here we have Circe's palace. We have a lion, a wolf, a tiger, maybe some type of leopard. And then we have some boars over here. We have some boar people. What's that about? Let's find out. Well, before long, they came to Circe's palace. It stood in a clearing in the woodland and was built of stone. Wild creatures such as lions and wolves roamed outside it, but Circe's power was so great that they did not attack the men, but fawned over them like dogs. When the party came to the doors of the palace, they could hear Circe inside, singing in a lovely, lilting voice as she worked at her loom, weaving such dazzling gossamer cloth as goddesses make. Then Polites said, "There is a woman in the house, singing as she weaves. The whole building rings with the echoes of her voice. Come in. Let us go in." So they entered, with no suspicion in their hearts. Only Eurylochus waited outside, ill at ease. But the goddess welcomed them. She served them wine and sweet meats, mixing in them drugs that made them forget their country and their loved ones, and long only to serve Circe. Then she touched each of them lightly with a rod, and as she did, they turned into bristly, snuffling swine.
Hogs, pigs, boars. Kind of like Pinocchio and his friends, turning into donkeys at Pleasure Island, perhaps.
And their minds remained the minds of men, though. But when they tried to cry for help, only grunts came out. Eurylochus saw it all and ran back to the ship with the terrible news. The men wanted to sail at once, abandoning Polites and the others, but Odysseus would not leave them.
He would not leave them.
He made his way alone to Circe's palace. Odysseus met Hermes, the messenger god, with his golden wand and golden winged sandals. He looked like a boy on the edge of manhood, with the first soft down still on his upper lip. Nevertheless, Odysseus bowed low, knowing that he was in the presence of a god.
Unlucky man, said Hermes, you could never free your companions from Circe's power. But wait, here grows an herb that will keep you safe from her witches' potions. It's called moly, and while you carry it, no harm can come to you. Circe will try to drug you. When she touches you with her rod, you must draw your sword as if to strike her. Then she will beg you to be her lover, and you must agree. For she is a goddess after all. But first make her swear to do you no harm. Otherwise she may steal away your courage and manhood as you lie naked in your bed.
So Hermes departed, and Odysseus continued to walk his way towards Circe's palace. When he reached the door, he cried out to be let in. Circe welcomed him, ushered him to a chair, and handed him a golden goblet in which she had mixed her potion. But when he had drunk, she touched him with her rod, saying, "Now be off to the pigsty and lie down with your friends."
But he remained a man.
He drew his sword and raised it high as if to strike her dead. And Circe fell to her knees and spoke in pleading tones.
Who are you? How is it you can resist my magic? Only one man could have been so strong at heart, Odysseus. If you are he, sheath your sword, come with me to bed. There we may learn to trust each other.
Odysseus answered, "How can I trust you when you have turned my men into swine? Promise to free them and to do me no further harm, and I will lie with you willingly."
The goddess gave her promise. She opened the door of the sty, and Polites and the others came trotting out looking just like full-grown swine. Circe smeared an ointment onto them, and their bristles fell away, their snouts receded, their limbs lengthened. Soon they were standing up once again, looking yonder.
Then as Circe's handmaidens prepared her bedchamber, Odysseus went back to the ship to tell Eurylochus and the others the news. The men would not believe him and wanted to put straight out to sea. But Odysseus told them I have given my word to a goddess, and I cannot break it. When Odysseus and his men reached the palace, Circe welcomed them. "Put aside your care," she said. "Eat, drink, and be merry." For a year, Odysseus's men feasted, while Odysseus kept loving company with the goddess, who bore him a son, Telegonus. At last, however, they grew homesick, and Odysseus begged Circe to help them go back to Ithaca. "You have offended one of the most powerful gods," said Circe, "and I cannot help you. If you want to return home, you must ask advice from the wisest of all, the blind seer, Tiresias." "But Tiresias is dead," said Odysseus. "Yes, you must venture into Hades itself to speak with him. It will be worth the journey. For while the rest of the dead are mere fleeting shadows, Tiresias keeps his wits about him still. He alone can tell you what your future holds." "Who will pilot me on such a voyage?" asked Odysseus. "No sailor has ever undertaken the dark journey to the house of the dead." "Do not worry," she replied. "Hoist your white sail, and the north wind will carry you where you wish to go." And notice the north wind is that which comes from the north. So he is voyaging south, the traditional direction of hell. Mythically speaking, of course. Once you have passed the river of the ocean, you will come to the coast of Hades with its black and blighted trees. And there you must leave your ship and walk into the land of the dead. When you come to a rock where two rivers meet, dig a trench and fill it with milk and honey. Add sweet wine, then water, and sprinkle barley meal upon it. Then, with the heartfelt prayers, you must promise that you, on your return to Ithaca, will make sacrifices to the dead, and to Tiresias especially. You must take a ram and an ewe and sacrifice them. The numberless hordes of the dead will swarm at the scent of blood, but you must hold them back with your sword until Tiresias arrives. He will answer your questions. Odysseus gathered his men and returned to the ship, but one did not come with them, young Elpenor. Having drunk too much wine, he was lying asleep on the palace roof. Hearing his companions calling for him, he leaped up, lost his footing, plummeted to the ground, and broke his neck. Odysseus meanwhile spoke to his men. "No doubt you think we are heading for home, but we are not. Our destination is Hades, where the goddess has told me to seek the advice of the seer Tiresias." And the men took to the sea. They took to the sea once more. Now the voyage to Hades. Odysseus and his crew did not have to touch the oars as the ship carried them to the dread land of the death, Circe's breeze filled the sail to speed them across the darkening sea to the very spot she had described. There Odysseus poured out milk, honey, sweet wine, water, and barley meal for the dead, and promised them a sacrifice when he should return to Ithaca. With many prayers and invocations, he slaughtered the ram and the ewe, and dark blood filled the trench. Ghosts flocked to the place of sacrifice, drawn by the vital energy still pulsing from the hot blood.
Old men, young girls, battle heroes, peasants, their shades clamored and jostled about the trench, and at the head of the throng was Elpenor. Odysseus wept to see him in the land of the gloom. We sailed with all speed, he said, but you have outstripped us.
However, Odysseus would not let any of the shades feast on the blood until Tiresias came, leaning on his golden staff.
And here we go, we have the dark souls trying to feast on the trench of the still pulsing vitality of the blood. One even has his finger dipped right here. And here in the very, we have the ram and the ewe in a very non-graphic depiction of a slaughtering. But lastly, we have Tiresias holding out his cup in one hand, grasping on to his golden rod in the other hand.
"Draw back and let me drink," said Tiresias. "Then I will reveal your future to you." Odysseus put up his sword, and Tiresias bent down to the streaming, steaming blood. Then he spoke. "Prince Odysseus, you have come from the sunlight into the land of the shadow in order to learn of your fate. So listen. You seek a safe passage home, but this will not be easy, for you have offended the earth-shaker Poseidon. First, your cunning brought down the walls of Troy, which Poseidon himself had set up. Second, you have blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. You cannot hope to escape the anger of the gods completely, but if you are careful, you and your companions may yet come safely home. Be warned, if you arouse the wrath of the gods once more, the reward will be death and misery. If you return home at all, it will be late and alone. You must hope it is not too late, for even now suitors of many lands are arriving at your palace and wooing your wife Penelope with fine gifts and finer words. Your son Telemachus is still a boy. How can he protect her? I will heed your words, whatever may befall. I shall not give up hope. When he was still an infant, my son Telemachus fell from a fisherman's boat into the salt sea. Yet he was not lost. A dolphin carried him on its back, safe to shore. And that is why the seal on my ring shows a leaping dolphin. In the same way, surely the gods that weave my fate will bring me safely home at last. After that, Odysseus let each of the shades, one by one, feed sacrifice. And as they did so, they seemed to take on substance and remember themselves again. Odysseus was stricken to see his mother, Anticlea, among them. "Mother," he cried, "tell me what brought you to this dim land." "It was my longing for you, my son," she replied. Odysseus reached across the trench to comfort her, and 3 times he tried to clasp her, but it was like embracing mist. Then came the ghost of Agamemnon, who had led the army against Troy. Odysseus asked him, "Did you too arouse the anger of Poseidon on your journey home?" "No," Agamemnon replied. "I sailed home safely, longing for my wife Clytemnestra, but she and her lover cut me down with an axe as I came from my path. May the gods save you from such a homecoming, my friend." Odysseus questioned all who came, and they told him their stories. Some still hugged their envious and spites to them, like precious treasures. Some remembered golden days and tender words, but none had thought for the future, except the blind seer, Odysseus. So that's it for tonight. We will pick up with the Song of the Sirens next time. So sleep well. Have an even better tomorrow. Bye. Bye. Good night. Sleep well. Welcome back, my friends. Thank you for joining us. Well, last time we left Odysseus, he was in Hades. He had made a trip to talk with a man who would be able to tell him crucial information about where to go. So, Odysseus was the man Odysseus had voyaged to Hades to talk to. Odysseus was a seer, and even in death still had the guile and the wisdom to retain his ability to see into the future. So Odysseus asked, "How is it I may venture back to my home of Ithaca?" To which Tiresias replies, "You seek a safe passage home, but this will not be easy, for you have offended the earth-shaker, Poseidon. First, your cunning brought down the walls of Troy, which Poseidon himself had set up. And second, you have blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. You cannot hope to escape the anger of the gods completely. But if you are careful, you and your companions may yet come safely home." But because he knows Odysseus is very prideful, perhaps and maybe despite his guile and cunning, he says, "Be warned, if you arouse the wrath of the gods once more, the reward will be death and misery. If you return home at all, it will be late and alone." So Odysseus from then continued to linger in Hades to be able to talk to the other souls and learn what he could, because Odysseus is pretty intelligent, and he knows that many times, if he is respectful, he may learn valuable information from those with whom he parleys. So he sacked Troy. He was a key player in the fall of Troy. And then he got whisked off due to the wrath of Poseidon across the seas, bypassing Ithaca, going way, way past Ithaca. Then he went all the way to the Isle of the Lotus Eaters, which appears to be in North Africa, where the fruit, the drugs, the drink, the flower is so potent it makes you forget all meaning and purpose in your life. So after he had the wisdom to avoid eating that and gathered his men, he sailed north to an island west of Sicily, and here he tried to learn what he could from the Cyclops and perhaps gain his help. But the Cyclops was only interested in eating him and his men. Boom, boom, boom. And in fact, the Cyclops did eat half of his dozen men. So after outwitting the Cyclops by hiding under the sheep. Once they got him drunk and stabbed his eye out, they stole the sheep and sailed.
Let's see, they sailed to
the island of the god of the wind, Aeolus. And after making it all the way within sight of Ithaca, the bag of wind that Aeolus had given Odysseus was opened up by his men when he was sleeping and had his guard down. So this wind blew them all the way west, yet again, to Circe's enchanted isle, whence his men were turned into buffoons and boors to be her minions. So Odysseus actually found the messenger of the gods, Hermes,
who told him to draw his sword and be on the offense when meeting Circe, the goddess of enchantment, so as not to fall under her spell. And so in fact for years he became her lover, only to one day tell her to let him go, and she did.
And because he swooned her, she directed him towards the south,
into Hades, where he learned his fate from Tiresias.
So now you are caught up. So now we've come to the song of the Sirens. From Hades, Odysseus returned to Aea to thank
Circe, and to bury the body of Elpenor, the man, the youngest of his men, who had fallen from the roof due to his inexperience, just as he had requested.
"Welcome, brave men," she greeted them. "You have faced death undaunted. For most it is enough to meet death once in a lifetime. You are fated to do so twice. But now forget murky Hades. Eat, drink, and in the morning you shall set sail." Odysseus and his men were glad to be back in the world of light and laughter, and spent that evening celebrating.
And the next day Circe bade them farewell with some last words of advice for Odysseus.
"You must sail past the island of the Sirens. They bewitch passing sailors with their beautiful singing. If you sail too close to them, you will fall under their spell, and that will be the end of you. For though they seem from the sea like lovely maidens, once they have lured you ashore, they will turn into hag-like birds of prey. Their island is littered with the bones of men they have trapped
and devoured." And here we have a picture of these hag-like birds of prey.
Once safely past the Sirens, More dangers await you. You must choose between two terrible routes. The first is overshadowed by great rocks, known as the Wanderers, because they do not stay still, but clash together and seem to take pleasure in smashing ships into pieces. Only Jason and the Argonauts ever passed that way safely, and that was with the help of the goddess Hera. And the other route is bounded on one side by cliffs so high you cannot see the sky above them. And halfway up these cliffs is a dingy cave in which the monster Scylla lives. Her cry will not frighten you. It is no more worrying than a pup's yelp. But if you see her, you will not forget her. She has 12 dangling feet and 6 long necks, each topped with a grisly head, each with 3 rows of evil teeth. And from her cave she fishes in the morning, in the roaring sea below, scooping out dolphins and sharks and other beasts. She feasts greedily with all her heads from the deck of any passing ship, glutting herself on death. So I guess I was wrong. This wasn't the Sirens. This was actually the Scylla or Scylla. Now, on the other side of the cliff, it's lower. A fig tree grows upon it, but do not steer beneath its shady boughs, for there the Charybdis lurks. 3 times a day she sucks the dark waters down, then jets them back in a hideous fountain. If you are caught by her, there is no hope for you. Better to steer by the Scylla and lose 6 men than to all perish in the maw of the Charybdis. Could we not simply slay these monsters? Asked Odysseus. Don't be a fool, replied Circe. These are deathless creatures, beyond your strength and understanding. And Odysseus set sail once again, worrying about how to best deal with the perils ahead. So as they neared the island of the Sirens, he told his men of the dangers facing them. We must not listen to the Sirens' songs, he said, or we shall be lost. You must block your ears with soft wax so that you cannot hear. But Odysseus himself could not pass by the fabled island without hearing the song that was so beautiful it could lure men to their deaths. Again heeding Circe's words, he told his men to lash him to the mast, and made them promise not to release him, even if he commanded them to. Here we go. Here is the cover page or illustration. Wow. Are you ready for this, guys? When they drew near to the island, the wind dropped. All was calm and hushed, and into that hush dripped the honeyed notes of the Sirens' song. A song of longing and welcome, of promise and delight. To listen to it was both a rapture and a torment. Odysseus begged and pleaded with his crew to set him free so that he could follow the majestic song to its source. But they would not, and only bound him tighter to the mast as the song of the Sirens grew
ever nearer.
So once past the Sirens' Isle, Odysseus chose to take the route between the Scylla and the Charybdis, knowing that no friendly god would speed his ship past the dreadful wanderers. Soon he could see ahead the crash and the spray of the waters. It was a frightening sight in the roaring of the sea beneath the Scylla's cave, together with a low belching sound as Charybdis sucked down the waters and spewed them out again, drained the courage from the rowers, who let their oars drop idle into the water. Odysseus urged them, "Be brave. This is no worse than in the Cyclops cave. Row, row for your lives." Where Charybdis gulped and vomited the salt waters, the sea swirled in a deadly whirlpool, which would drag any ship to the bottom. There was no choice but to hug the cliffs. And suddenly above, Scylla's 6 fearsome heads swung down, and she seized 6 of the strongest and best of the crews in her jaws. Odysseus could do nothing as the monster lifted the screaming men into the air, calling his name with heart-rending cries. So as they sailed past, Odysseus and the remaining crew could hear above the turmoil of the sea a terrible lapping, crunching, as Scylla savored her grisly meal. And here's the Sirens singing their sweet, sweet song as Odysseus listens with a face of melancholy, of actual delight, serene delight. The Sirens serenaded him. Luckily he was tied tight, and you see the 2 men on the mast tightening the ropes. But little would he have known all the dead bones that they were hiding in their closet. And I'm not really sure what's going on with this guy back here, but perhaps it's another part of the story that was left out. Okay, so we are now on the chapter of the Council of the Gods. After watching powerless while the monster Scylla devoured 6 of his men, Odysseus was thankful to arrive at the island of Sicily, where he anchored in a beautiful, curving bay. Now on that island were the herds of the sun god, Hyperion, 7 herds of cows and 7 flocks of sheep. Each herd and flock numbered exactly 50 animals. None ever died, and none were born. "We must leave these animals alone," said Odysseus, "for if we meddle with them, trouble will surely follow." And his men agreed. Of course, as Tiresias in Hades mentioned, he warned him not to toy and meddle with the gods or their sheep. So I wonder if in this tale, the sheep was a metaphor for the citizens of a particular country. But a strong south wind kept them cooped up on the island for a whole month, at the end of which their supplies were definitely exhausted. Odysseus fretted and worried. He begged great Zeus to guide him, and the god granted him that deep sleep that brings new strength and new ideas. And while Odysseus slept, his men lay awake with hunger gnawing at their stomachs. At last Eurylochus said, "Starvation is the worst of all deaths. Let us feast on the sun god's cattle. When we get back to Ithaca, we can offer sacrifice to Hyperion and earn his forgiveness." So the men herded up the sun god's cattle with their long, curly horns and slaughtered them. When Odysseus awoke and smelled the roasting meat, his heart almost failed. For he knew, as Tiresias had foretold, that a fearful end awaited those who offended one of the gods. Indeed, at that moment, Hyperion was standing before Zeus, demanding justice. "Odysseus' crew have slaughtered my cattle, which were my joy. Every day, as I took my path across the sky, I looked down on them with pride and pleasure. Now they are gone. Unless these men pay with their lives, I will go and live in Hades and shine among the dead." So when the wind calmed and the men were able to once more hoist the white sail to take to the sea, their fate was already sealed. Zeus raised a black, violent storm and blasted the ship with searing thunderbolts. The ship shivered to pieces, and Eurylochus and all the others were drowned. Only Odysseus survived, clinging to the wreckage. For 9 days he drifted helpless on the salt sea, until at last he came to the island of Ogygia, home of Calypso, a goddess with many strange powers. Calypso, like Circe, fell in love with Odysseus, who had traveled so far across the world and had proved his courage and ingenuity so many times. "You deserve to be a god," she said. "Marry me and I will make you immortal." But Odysseus would not marry her, for he knew in his heart he must return to Penelope and Telemachus. Yet how could he? He had no ship and no crew to man one. And besides, Calypso had so bewitched him that he could not leave the island. So Odysseus spent 7 long, lonely years sitting on the cliff tops, staring out to sea, and weeping at his fate. Now all this time, Poseidon the earth shaker kept Odysseus in the glare of his terrible anger. In the glare of his terrible anger. In Ithaca, Penelope grieved for her absent husband. Suitors from many lands came to Odysseus' palace, hoping to win her hand. "Odysseus is surely dead," they would say as they lounged at his table, eating his food and drinking his wine. Then they would call for music and dancing, and revel into the night. Drinking and dancing and reveling into the night. Odysseus' son Telemachus was now a young man, handsome and strong. But there was little he could do against the arrogance of the suitors. As for Penelope, she could only fight for time. "I will make my choice among you," she told them. "When I have finished this tapestry showing my husband Odysseus' great feats against the Trojans, this much I owe to his memory." Each day she worked hard at the tapestry, but each night, while the drunken suitors caroused and sang, she unpicked the work she had done, so the tapestry was never finished. Now it happened that Poseidon was absent from Mount Olympus, having gone to Ethiopia to receive a great sacrifice of bulls and rams. As the other gods gathered together in the palace of Zeus, Athena, the wisest of them all, spoke. Often, it is true, these foolish mortals bring their troubles on themselves, while blaming the gods for all their misfortunes. But my heart is wrung for Odysseus, who has been kept so long from his home and family. Even now, he is prisoner of Calypso, daughter of Atlas, who knows the depths of the sea, and on his shoulders supports the great pillars that keep the earth and sky apart. Tell me, Zeus, why do you not take pity on him?
It is not I, but Poseidon, who cannot forgive Odysseus for blinding his son Polyphemus.
Then, responded Athena, as Poseidon is not here, let us see if we can help this unfortunate man. Let us send bright Hermes, our messenger, to instruct Calypso to let Odysseus go. I shall proceed to Ithaca to rouse the spirit of young Telemachus, Odysseus' son, who has had to endure so many insults from his mother's suitors. And with that, Athena strapped on her sandals of gleaming gold, which carried her like the wind over land and water, and sped down to Ithaca, where she took the form of Mentes, an old friend of Odysseus. When she arrived at Odysseus' palace, she found the suitors roistering in the courtyard, playing games, swilling wine, and making jokes at the expense of Telemachus. He was pale and tense, but when he saw Mentes, he rose and courteously beckoned him to sit down. "What news of your father, noble Odysseus?" asked the guest. "No news," answered Telemachus. "His bones are bleached in the sun on some far island or rotting at the bottom of the sea. Do you think if these louts thought there was any chance of his return they would be lolling here? No, they would be running up to their ships as fast as their legs could carry them. If so great a man as Odysseus has died, the world would know of it. Tell these suitors they are not welcome here, and if they choose to stay, they must suffer the consequences. Then take the ship with me, and we will sail in search of news." Telemachus did as Mentes advised, and they sailed the next day for Sparta to ask King Menelaus for news of Odysseus. And all the time, Athena, in the guise of Mentes, was at the side of young Telemachus, shaping the boy into a man and strengthening his resolve to find his father and defy the suitors. Alright, well, I think we're just gonna go ahead and leave it here for today and pick it up next time with Odysseus being cast ashore. Thanks for dropping by, and thank you for all your support. So welcome back once again, everybody, to the adventures of Odysseus. Now, of course, Odysseus has been through quite a bit up to this point. He sacked Troy, being the mastermind behind the conception of using the Trojan horse. But, as with all great efforts, sometimes there are great consequences. In the great sea god, the earth shaker, Poseidon, was one of the gods that built the walls of Troy, and he was angered by Odysseus. So he flung him off to a faraway isle, where he had to dodge the Lotus Eaters, outwit the Cyclops. He had to elude and defend him and his men against the enchantment of Circe. He had to swoon Aeolus and earn his respect, dine with this god of the wind, and he almost made it home if it weren't for his preventing his men from knowing what was in that pouch that Aeolus gave him. And due to their, as humans tend to be full of, their curiosity, they opened the pouch just in sight of Ithaca, and it was wind. It was an east wind, and drove them west, a wind coming from the east. It drove them all the way back. So from here, they came back to Circe's enchanted isle, where Circe had earned Circe's trust and companionship. So she once again gave him advice, told him how he was to be able to sail through the great walls of Italy and Sicily. And here the Scylla and Charybdis dwell. Now the Scylla is a great monster who picks off men from the ships that pass too close to the shoreline, but they were forced to pass close because the Charybdis sucks great swaths of water, making whirlpools that would suck entire ships down to the bottom. So Odysseus chose to save all his men by sacrificing, to save some of his men rather, by sacrificing a few to the Scylla as they passed by. And of course, Odysseus, being the brave and curious and cunning man he is, before they went there, he knew they would have to pass the Sirens with their beautiful, alluring chants, and because of Circe's warnings, he heeded them and knew he would be mesmerized, so he told his men wittily to plug their ears with wax, while he had them tie himself up to the mast of the ship, as we see here in this great picture. While he had the pleasure of listening to their deadly, lovely voices. And we could see here the picture of the women, the Sirens, the man-eaters, with the bones of the former victims that fell prey to their lovely crews. So they made it to Sicily. And when they shored up on the Hyperion's castle, he had many, many, many flocks of sheep. But due to the warnings of Tiresias, who he consulted with in Hades, he knew not to meddle with any more of the gods or their flocks, the things they watched over. So, while he and his men tried their best to go hungry after a month and their supplies dwindling down to near nothing, one night while Odysseus was asleep, his men slaughtered some of the god Hyperion's cattle. And from this, they were whisked off to sea, and their boats were destroyed. And Zeus was responsible, but only because his loyalty to the gods before the men, despite pitying Odysseus. So all his men died in the great thunderbolts and black, terrible storms that Zeus created to punish them for eating the gods' cattle. And now all Odysseus has is himself clinging, floating for 9 days and nights in the salt sea until he came upon the isle of Calypso, whereupon she essentially held him captive for 7 years as a man worthy of becoming a god and being the husband of a goddess. But he wasn't happy. Odysseus spent 7 long, lonely years sitting on top of cliffs, staring out to sea and weeping at his fate. So, while Poseidon was down in Africa, accepting sacrifices, Athena thought, Odysseus has been through enough and been honorable the whole time. He's been a truthful, honest, brave, courageous, witty, clever man. And he's done his best to keep his men safe, despite them all drowning. So she took it upon herself to ask Zeus for some vouchsafing of Odysseus, and now has guided young Telemachus. Athena, in the guise of Mentes, one of Odysseus's old friends, was at the side of young Telemachus, shaping the boy into a man and strengthening his resolve to find his father and defy the suitors who were disgracing and disrespecting Odysseus's castle and island and kingdom. So it's been a while. Penelope, Odysseus's wife, is trying her best to keep the suitors at bay, doing witty things, such as promising them her choice of one of them in marriage as soon as she finishes a tapestry honoring Odysseus in Troy. Yet every night while they get drunk and lose their wits, she discreetly undoes most of the work she had done that day, buying her much time. And by this time Telemachus is older, and has grown almost into a man, at least in physical appearance. And that's where Athena comes in. With the help of Athena in the guise as Mentes, young Telemachus is spurred on into action to defy the suitors and take back what is rightfully his and his father's. So, Zeus now is going to help Odysseus escape Calypso's isle by sending a messenger, Hermes. Hermes sped across the waves with his golden wand that brings sweet sleep or dispels it, and his golden sandals that carried him like Athena swiftly through the air. He dipped and soared above the waves, exulting in their spray, their salty spray. He found Calypso in her cave, singing softly and weaving at her loom with that golden shuttle. On the hearth a fire blazed, and the gentle winds wafted the scent of burning cedar and juniper across the island. By the entrance to the cave was a grove of alders, aspens, and fragrant cypresses, full of owls and falcons and seafaring birds, while shading the entrance itself was a vine heavy with grapes. So even the god's heart lifted at such beauty. Calypso welcomed him and offered him nectar, asking, "What brings you here, Hermes?" "I am commanded by the all-powerful Zeus to tell you to release luckless Odysseus. It is not his destiny to remain with you. He must build himself a raft to take him to the land of the Phaeacians. They will furnish him with a ship back to Ithaca, his home." "Oh, cruel Zeus," cried Calypso. "I rescued this man from the sea when Zeus had shattered his ship with a thunderbolt. I offered him immortality, to live with me and love me in this enchanted place, and now I must let him go. Who will I find then to be my companion?" Nevertheless, Calypso had to obey the command of Zeus. She went in search of Odysseus and found him, as usual, sitting by the shore, gazing out across the sea to where Ithaca lay. "The deathless gods have taken pity on you, Odysseus," she said. "I am to let you go. So if you wish, you may cut down trees, and I will give you tools to make a raft to carry yourself across the sea. I will provide you with food and water and wine, but think, I beg you, of the sorrows and the hardships that must lie ahead. You have a choice. Only forget your family, and you can live here with me in eternal bliss." "You have a heart to pity me," said Odysseus, "but I have not one to love you. My love is already pledged. I will endure any hardship if I can return to Ithaca." So Odysseus started work at once, building his raft. He felled 20 trees and shaped them with a bronze axe. He pinned the timbers together to make a raft and built half a deck on it. He then raised a mast and fitted a steering oar and fenced the sides with plaited willows backed with brushwood. After 4 days the raft was ready. So at dawn the next day, Calypso bade him farewell. She gave him provisions for his journey and a fair wind to help him on his way, and she watched him far, far into the distance. Now and then the breeze brought her some lively snatch of a sailor's song that Odysseus was singing in his high spirits. She buried even these sad fragments deep in her heart to treasure through the lonely years to come. Calypso was not the only god to hear Odysseus singing. Earthshaker Poseidon, who spans the earth, also heard that merry voice as he returned from Ethiopia.
Who has dared to do this? He bellowed. This man has not yet paid for his crimes against me.
And Poseidon summoned a raging tempest to stir up the waves. Odysseus clung to his raft while it was flung hither and thither by the squalling winds and deep, rolling seas. But there was one to take pity on him. Ino, who was once a mortal woman, but now lives in the sea, rose from the waves like a gull and settled on the raft. "Poor man," she said, "Poseidon's anger will destroy you if you try to fight him. You must strip off your clothes and trust yourself to the sea, leaving this unlucky raft to its fate. Here, take this scarf. You can swim from here to the island of the Phaeacians, and the scarf will keep you safe from drowning. But once you reach the shore, cast it into the sea, so that it will return to me." Odysseus grasped the scarf and flung himself into the waves with only a single plank to cling to. For 2 days and nights, Odysseus rode the waves until, exhausted and near the end of his strength, he reached the rocky shore of the land of the Phaeacians. I just want to take a minute to look at this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful portrait. I love the waves. Look like they have the texture of smooth cylinders of jello, smooth rolling cylinders with more pyramidal shapes in the background. It's really, I really like that design. And there's Ino coming from above to rescue him. Just goes to show you that if you stay true to what you know and don't deceive unless you absolutely have to, there may be fate. Fate may rescue you yet. The rocks tore the skin from his hands as he clutched them. With his last strength, he flung Ino's, I guess, precious scarf back into the sea. And then a wave caught him and threw him onto the beach. He lay there a broken man with salty brine pouring from his mouth and nostrils. And as Odysseus lay bruised and battered on the Phaeacian shore, Athena sealed his eyes with sleep. Then the goddess went to the palace of King Alcinous and to the bedside of his daughter Nausicaa, a lovely girl in the first flush of beauty. The goddess whispered in her dreams, putting it in her mind that soon she would be married, and that she should take a wagon down to the washing place near the sea to launder all her fine clothes in preparation for the ceremony. So the next day, Nausicaa and her maids went down to the washing place. They took a basket full of fine foods and wine and a flask of soft olive oil to rub into their skin after bathing, for they intended to make a holiday of it. The girls washed the clothes and laid them to dry by the sea's edge. Then they bathed and anointed themselves with the olive oil, and afterwards they played at catch, tossing a ball from one to the other to the rhythm of Nausicaa's singing. At last, one of the girls threw too hard, and the ball went into the sea with a splash, and they all shrieked. That was Athena's signal. She caused Odysseus to wake. He staggered out from behind the bush that had hidden him, with only a bow wrenched from the underground to cover his nakedness. To the girls he seemed like some wild creature, and they fled from him. Only Nausicaa stood her ground, for Athena had filled her with courage. Odysseus said, "Fair lady, if you are a lady and not a goddess, have pity on me. Tell me, what land is this where I've been cast ashore?" "This is the country of the Phaeacians. I am Nausicaa, daughter of the king Alcinous. You are welcome, stranger, for though you look rough, your words are gentle. Bathe, dress, and come with me to my father's palace, and he will give you all that is due to a guest. For Zeus himself is the patron of the wayfaring stranger." Alcinous welcomed the castaway with great kindness. He could see that this was no ordinary man. Indeed, Athena cast such a glow about Odysseus that he seemed like one of the immortals. And here we have King Alcinous giving Odysseus some clothes, a wardrobe, a robe, one of those to wear. Here's an interesting scene of daily life. We have some boys looking at something in the distance, an old lady scheming on something, a girl perhaps looking at the escaped parrot, a couple flirting in the top rooms, a maiden looking down upon Nausicaa, who is trying to discuss Odysseus with her father, and some old men perhaps discussing what this means, and some other people dancing. This guy's just real low-key. I think he might be scheming as well. He might be the son of this old lady here. And this guy might be in relation with this woman. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe he's just looking at the ball. And these half-naked youngins are measuring the rod over here, looks like. "Tell me, what can I do for you?" said the king. "Give me a ship to take me home," answered Odysseus. "It shall be done," said Alcinous. "But first you must recover from your ordeal. Go and rest now, and tomorrow I will prepare a ship to take you wherever you wish. In your honor, I will hold a great banquet and games in which our younger men can show you what we Phaeacians are made of." Next day Odysseus, who had still not told Alcinous his name, sat in the place of honor at the feast. When everyone had eaten and drunk their fill, Demodocus, the blind bard, took down his lyre. Athena inspired him to sing of heroes, and the story he chose told of the quarrel between Odysseus and Achilles outside the walls of Troy. Odysseus drew his cloak over his face so that no one should see the tears that ran down his cheeks. Then Alcinous announced the start of the games. The young Phaeacians vied with one another, running, wrestling, jumping, and throwing the discus. each hoping to impress the noble stranger with their strength and skill. The best of them was named Euryalus, and this young man approached Odysseus, saying, Now it is your turn to show us what you are made of, for no one can be called a man unless he excels at some sport or other. I have no taste for such things today, Odysseus said. My heart is aching to be home. Euryalus sneered. You speak like some penny-pinching merchant, whose only pleasure is to count the goods in and out of his warehouse, not like a man of spirit. Odysseus said, The gods do not give all their blessings to one man. You have the body of a young hero, but an empty head. Once I too was young and strong, but I have suffered much through the malice of the gods. Yet even now I will accept your challenge at any sport, even running, though I have been sorely battered by the waves. So Euryalus picked up a discus and threw it as far as he could. Beat that, he said. Odysseus rose and took a discus. As he swung back his cloak, the crowd gasped at the corded muscles of his upper arm. He threw, and the discus sailed powerfully through the air, far outstripping Euryalus' throw. I'm afraid my strength is not what it was, said Odysseus, and everyone laughed, except Euryalus. Then King Alcinous called for dancing, and the moment was forgotten. When the dancing was over, Odysseus asked if the bard Demodocus would sing again, and Demodocus sang of the deeds of Odysseus and Menelaus at the sack of Troy. Once more glittering tears welled up from Odysseus' eyes. When the story had come to an end, he said, Alcinous, you have done me every honor, and given me many gifts, and have not so much as asked my name. So now I will tell you, I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, Prince of Ithaca. Since the fall of Troy I have been wandering the seas, buffeted by fate and the gods, from one horror to the next. But now with your help I hope to reach my home at last. Your ship is ready, replied Alcinous, and you need have no fear of shipwreck. We Phaeacians use no steering oars, for our ships respond to the very thoughts, our very thoughts, and skim across the waves with ease and grace. Your long journey is coming to its end. Farewell, Odysseus.
Thank you all for watching. Until next time, sleep well. And hope you have a deep, restful sleep that gives you the courage and wittiness and wisdom to approach the day with humility and honest work, so that fate will in turn reward you in time, and you will be proud of your stories when you get old. Bye.
Well, we're back for our final adventure. Odysseus, yes, he's been through so much, so much. It's been from Troy to to the Lotus Eaters, to the Cyclops, to Calypso's Isle, to Nausicaa, to the island of Aeolus, Circe's enchanted isle. He's avoided the Sirens, the Scylla, and the Charybdis. And he's somehow eluded the fate of death. He's been to the underworld. And now with the help of Circe, who he was forced to bed with for a very, very long time. He's been away for a total of 20 years at this point. And his wife, Penelope, doesn't even know whether he ever will come back. And if he does come back, though, she's been weaving and unweaving her tapestry, or tapestry as I was told. It's properly said. So the return to Ithaca, page 56. Let's find out. Okay. So Odysseus was helped out by the goddess, once mortal, now a goddess. What was her name? Was it Calypso? No, I didn't think it was Ino. That's who it was, Ino. But Ino helped out Odysseus and led him to this beautiful, beautiful island where King Alcinous was actually a very gracious host even before learning he was Odysseus, son of Laertes. But once he defeated Euryalus in a contest and showed that he was pretty much a badass, he revealed himself as the great Odysseus. And Alcinous said, "Hey man, your ship is ready. We Phaeacians use no steering oars, for our ships respond to our very thoughts and skim across the water with ease. Your long journey is coming to an end." So the return to Ithaca. The Phaeacian ship carried Odysseus swiftly and safely to Ithaca. When it arrived, Odysseus himself was in a sound slumber sent by the goddess Athena, and the sailors could not wake him, so they carried him ashore, still wrapped in his blanket, and laid him gently down, together with the rich gifts that he had received from King Alcinous. But the generous spirit of the Phaeacians did not please Poseidon. As a lesson to King Alcinous, Poseidon waited until the ship had reached the shore, the Phaeacian harbor, on its homeward journey, and then turned it into solid stone. And we can see that happening right here. It's being turned into solid stone, so that it sank to the bottom with all its crew, and no man can defy the gods. Meanwhile, Odysseus was on Ithaca, stirring from his spellbound sleep. All around him was a thick mist. "Where am I?" he groaned. "Have these Phaeacians betrayed me?" Athena, with her gleaming eyes, stepped out of the murk and in the guise of a simple shepherd, she said, "You ask where this is," she said. "It is an isle whose fame has traveled far. You are in Ithaca." Odysseus could have shouted for joy, but instead, he said cautiously, "I have heard of the place." Then Athena took her own shape, a woman, tall and stately, with a beauty that shone from within. She laughed. "You think to hide your identity, but clever as you are, you cannot deceive me, for you are speaking to a god. You cannot keep anything from me." "If this is Ithaca," said Odysseus, "then I beg you, show it to me." So Athena dispelled the mist, and Odysseus fell to his knees to kiss the soul of his homeland. Then Athena told him of Penelope's plight. "Beset by so many bullying suitors, I will go to Sparta to fetch your son, Telemachus. At the court of King Menelaus he has earned men's respect, and he has matured into a fine man. Meanwhile you must go to the hut of the old swineherd, Eumaeus. He has remained loyal to Penelope and Telemachus, and will help us in our plans. But first, I will make sure that no one here will recognize you." And with that, Athena touched Odysseus with her wand. His hair turned gray. His skin became wrinkled and old. His eyes lost their brightness, and his body bent. His clothes turned into filthy old rags. The goddess gave him the staff of a beggar's bag, and he looked every inch like an aged vagabond. In this guise, Odysseus made his way to Eumaeus' hut. The swineherd's dog leapt out at him, barking and slavering, and nearly knocked him to the ground. But when they stopped at Eumaeus' command, "Welcome, stranger," the swineherd said. "If I can offer you any food or service, I will be happy to, in the hope that some other man will do the same for my noble master, Odysseus. Should he, by chance, be traveling poor and friendless through some strange land. Oh, that he would come home." And here we have Athena speaking with Odysseus, vouchsafing him the garb of a vagabond outside Eumaeus' hut, with his little dogs barking. Athena really has a penchant for Odysseus. "My friend," said Odysseus, "may the gods reward you with kindness and grant you your desire." And the pair settled down around the swineherd's fire to eat and talk and sleep, as old men do. The goddess Athena left Odysseus sleeping in the swineherd's hut and went swiftly to Sparta, to the bedside of Telemachus. She found him tossing and turning, tormented by worry for his father and mother. Her eyes flashed with sympathy. She told him, "It is time to take your leave of King Menelaus and return to Ithaca. Do not waste a moment, and when you reach the shore, go straight to the hut of the swineherd Eumaeus." Telemachus roused himself By dawn horses were already harnessed to his chariot. He stayed only long enough to say farewell to his host before setting out for his ship. He stood at the prow, urging the ship across the waves, longing to be home. Meanwhile, Odysseus spent the day with Eumaeus, questioning him closely about the events on the island. Eumaeus told him everything, never dreaming that the old beggar to whom he spoke was Odysseus himself. Odysseus already knew of his mother's death, for he had spoken to her in the shade in the land of the dead. But now he heard firsthand from the loyal swineherd about the loutish behavior of the suitors and Telemachus' journey in the quest of his father. That night, Odysseus slept once more in the swineherd's hut, and as dawn lit up the sky, he was awakened by the sound of dogs whimpering. They were not barking as they would at a stranger, but greeting some long-lost friend. It was a tall young man, fit and strong. He carried the spear tipped with bronze. "It is some fine young warrior," said Odysseus. Eumaeus, wiping the sleep from his bleary eyes, replied, "It is Telemachus, come home at last." And he embraced his young master, weeping for joy. So it was that Odysseus laid eyes for the first time on the grown son whom he had left as a baby. Telemachus felt the old wanderer's eyes on him and met his glance. "Welcome, stranger. Though it is a poor welcome I can offer, who dare not even go to my own home for fear of the treachery and murder I read in the suitor's eyes." Then he turned to Eumaeus. "Old friend, please go and tell my mother that I am home, and find out how the land lies before I return to my father's place." As soon as Eumaeus had gone, the goddess Athena approached the hut. Only Odysseus could see her, for the immortals are only visible to mortals when they so choose. But the dogs must have sensed her, for they slunk away, whining and trembling with fear. And Athena beckoned Odysseus to come outside. There she told him, "The time has come to act." She touched him with her wand, and he changed back to his own appearance, if anything, stronger and younger and more handsome than before. When he returned to the hut, Telemachus, already unsettled by the dogs, started back in terror. "Are you a god?" he asked. "I am no god," said Odysseus. "I am Odysseus, prince of Ithaca, returned to claim what is mine." It was the goddess Athena who disguised me as an old man, for just as the gods themselves seem now old, now young, now man, now woman, they have the power to transform us mortals as they choose. And with that, father and son fell into each other's arms, weeping with joy. After Odysseus' long 20-year journey home, and Telemachus' long search, they had found each other at last. United, they could face the suitors. "Together," said Odysseus, "we shall scour the place clean of those vermin." "But how can that be?" asked Telemachus. "There are only 2 of us, and over 100 of them, all spoiling for a fight." "With Athena and Zeus on our side, we do not need any further allies. replied Odysseus. "Telemachus, you must go to the palace. I will follow, once more disguised as an old man. The suitors will mock me and even threaten me. Don't let your anger show. The time will soon come when they will bitterly regret every cruel word and unkind blow. When the goddess sends me a sign, I will nod to you. Then you must take down every weapon, every piece of armor in the hall, and hide them away upstairs. Tell the suitors that you do not want the weapons tarnished by the smoke from the fire, and also that you wish to prevent any quarrel among them from getting too out of hand. Leave just 2 swords, 2 spears, and 2 shields. Those are for us." A beggar at the door. When Telemachus arrived at the palace, he was greeted by his old nurse Eurycleia and by his mother Penelope. Both were in tears at his return. Then the suitors thronged around him, bidding him welcome with their lips, but looking murder from their eyes. Things might have turned ugly had not Medon, one of the few faithful servants, called the men to the table to celebrate Telemachus's return. None of the suitors had any qualms about enjoying yet another feast at Odysseus's expense. As they were dining, Odysseus came to the palace, disguised as an old beggar. Outside the doors to the courtyard, he saw an old dog lying neglected on a heap of dung. It was Argus, his faithful hound, who had been waiting patiently all the long years for his master's return. No disguise could have prevented Argus from knowing Odysseus. The old dog, too crippled and starved to move, wagged his mangy tail. He lived beyond his time, hoping against hope for his master's return. Now Argus's faithfulness was repaid, and he died content. So it was when Odysseus stumbled across the threshold of his palace, like a failing old man dressed in rags, leaning on a stick. His head was swimming with sadness. He had to sit down and rest against a pillar. Athena reappeared to him, saying, "Go to each of the suitors, and in turn beg from them. That way you may test if any are worthy to be spared." Odysseus wandered from man to man with outstretched hands and whining voice, begging for alms. Some of the men grudgingly gave him crust of bread, but none spared him a kind word. Antinous was one of the meanest and most cruel of them. "Go away, old man," he said. "Don't slobber over the table. You're putting me off my meal. A fine man like you should have pity on an old wretch like me," replied Odysseus. "Once I was rich, and then I never turned a beggar from my door." "Then it's your own fault that you're poor now," retorted Antinous, and all the suitors laughed. Odysseus felt his anger rising. "You begrudge me a pinch of salt or a crust of bread, yet you sit there gorging on another's meat?" Then he turned and walked away. Antinous, outraged at being spoken to in such tones by a mere beggar, lashed out with a stool, catching Odysseus a terrible blow on the back, below his right shoulder. But Odysseus did not stagger. He took the force of the blow and walked on, shaking his head. At that moment another beggar came into the hall. This was a young man named Iris, who, though young and strong, had never worked, preferring to live by begging. Seeing Odysseus, he cried, "Get out, old man, or I will throw you out. There is no place for you here." "I have no quarrel with you," said Odysseus. "These men have enough to spare for both of us. For no man dare refuse a beggar, knowing that the gods, who have given him health and riches, can also take them away." But Antinous, eager to see the insolent beggar beaten and driven out, shouted, "Let the two beggars make a match of it. The winner shall eat his fill." The suitors rose from the table and made a circle around Iris and Odysseus. Their jeers and mockery died in their mouths. When Odysseus hitched up his rags and they saw his strong thighs, "This old man is not as feeble as he looks," they muttered. Iris, who had thought to win an easy victory, began to shake with fear. He lashed out, striking Odysseus on the shoulder. Then Odysseus swung his mighty arm and crunched his fist into Iris's neck. Iris fell heavily to the floor, blood pouring from his mouth. Odysseus took hold of Iris by the leg and dragged him from the room. "You can sit out here among the dogs and swine," he said, dumping Iris in the courtyard. "And remember, Argus had just died, and they had seen. He had seen how poorly they treated his own dog for 20 years. Odysseus returned to join the feast. The suitors made merry till nightfall, and Odysseus tended the fire, but at last they retired to their beds, and then Odysseus nodded to Telemachus. "It's time to take down the weapons from the wall." And while Telemachus saw to this, Odysseus waited by the fire. Now Penelope came into the hall to see if this beggar had any news of Odysseus. He comforted her with words, telling her that he had heard Odysseus was even then returning to his home. So Penelope called her serving maids and told them to wash the beggar's hands and feet, and to find him a place to rest, and to treat him as an honored guest, for he had spoken of her husband with such gentleness. Now the serving maids were lazy creatures, more often to be found in some dark corner with one of the suitors than by Penelope's side. They shrank from the old beggar. But Euryclea, the old nurse who had cared for Odysseus when he was a baby, willingly fetched a bronze basin and filled it with water to bathe the beggar's weary feet. While she was bathing his leg, she felt an old scar above his knee and knew her master had once. But he put his finger to her lips. "Do not betray me." So Euryclea did not say a word, though her heart was filled with a trembling joy. "Stranger," said Penelope, "I have one more question. I dreamed last night that a great eagle came down from the mountains and slaughtered all my white geese. What can it mean?" "Surely," replied Odysseus, "your dream meant that the eagle was Odysseus, come to take his vengeance on the suitors." "Dreams are of two kinds," said Penelope. "Some come to us through the gate of ivory, and these dreams are false. But others, Morpheus, the god of sleep, sends to us through the gate of horn. And these are true visions. I wish your interpretation were true, she went on. For now the suitors have discovered the trick by which I have kept them at bay, and my tapestry is finished. Tomorrow I must choose among them. As a test, I will set up 12 axes in a line. Odysseus used to do this, and shoot an arrow through the rings in their handles, a feat no other man could match. If anyone tomorrow can manage it, I will be his bride. And that night, Penelope lay weeping on her bed, dreading the morning. But at last Athena granted her the blessing of sleep. Odysseus lay down on a fleece by the dying embers of the fire. As he thought of the suitors, his heart growled for vengeance like a wild beast, ravening its prey. Odysseus's revenge. The next day was a feast in honor of Apollo, the god of archery, who fires the golden arrows of the sun. Penelope went to the storeroom where Odysseus had left his most precious treasures before setting off to Troy, and fetched down his carved and crafted bow and its quiver full of deadly arrows. She asked Telemachus to bury the 12 axes with their heads in the ground and their ringed handles sticking up, and then departed. Medon, the steward, summoned the suitors, and Telemachus explained to them that whoever could string Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through all 12 axes would win his mother's hand. Antinous laughed. "This is too easy," he said. "Even Leodes here," Antinous pointed at the weakest of them all, "could do it." And everyone cheered as Leodes picked up the bow, but he could not bend it to fit the string, nor could any of the others. They all strained with all their might. Finally Antinous himself tried, but he was no more successful. Then Odysseus rose. "Let me try," he said. "I once was a fine bowman. Let me see if I still have any strength left." "Are you mad?" asked Antinous. "Do you think a nameless wanderer could succeed where we princes have failed? You must be drunk." Odysseus took the bow, and he caressed it, feeling carefully for any weakness. But the bow was sound as ever. He took the string and attached it with little effort, as a master musician replacing the string on his lyre. It twanged beneath his fingers with a low, pure, menacing tone that drained the color from the suitor's cheeks, even as they watched him. Then Zeus let his thunder rumble across the sky. You can see it right there in the background. And Odysseus laughed at the sign of the gods' great favor. He took an arrow and fired it straight and true through the axe handles. He took a second and loosed the bow again. Antinous fell gurgling onto the table, an arrow through his neck. At first the suitors thought the old beggar had fired in error, but then they saw Telemachus step to his side. Sword appeared and spear in hand. Odysseus' voice boomed through the hall. "You curs! You thought that Odysseus would never return. You made yourselves at home in his palace, eating his food, drinking his drink, wooing his wife, in corrupting his servants. But I am back, and you all are doomed. Doomed, doomed, doomed. Doomed, doomed, doomed. And with that, Odysseus and Telemachus, aided by the goddess Athena, who watched in the shape of a swallow perched on the roof beam, set on the suitors and slaughtered every one. The last was cowardly Leodes, who threw his arms around Odysseus's legs to beg for mercy. But Odysseus, severed his head before the words had left his mouth. However, Odysseus spared the bard Phemius, who had sung for the suitors, for he would not kill one who was inspired by the gods. Music. Music, 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 music is next to godliness, apparently. And in the silence, after the battle, the faithful steward, Medon, crawled out unhurt from beneath a chair, where he had hidden from Odysseus's whirlwind of vengeance. All about them the bodies of the suitors lay heaped like a silver harvest that fishermen pour out from their nets onto the white sand. Odysseus ordered Medon to see that the corpses were moved, and the room cleaned and a new fire kindled. Then he unlocked the door to the women's quarters and called for Euryclea. When the old nurse saw the suitors lying dead, she could have shouted for joy, but Odysseus told her, "It is wrong to rejoice over any man's death, even your enemies. It is the will of the gods whether we live or die. Now go tell your mistress that I have returned and what has happened here." But Penelope, who had been sitting with her maids, listening to the blood-curdling cries from the hall, would not believe that her savior was Odysseus. "It must be some god who has done this thing," she said. "And besides, I could not fail to know my own husband, whatever suffering he had endured. Odysseus is dead." "No," said Euryclea, "this is Odysseus. When I washed his feet, I saw the scar on his leg." So Penelope went down to the hall. Here we have Euryclea taking towels from Penelope with an olive tree in the background. I think that's beautiful that they have an olive tree inside the house. And then here, finally, we have Penelope approaching Odysseus, as old as he looks. Odysseus was sitting against a pillar on one side of the great fire. Penelope did not go to embrace him, but instead sat on the other side of the fire. She remained there in silence, gazing at the old beggar man in his filthy rags. Sometimes, as the firelight flickered across his face, he did look like Odysseus. Sometimes he looked like a complete stranger. "You must be tired," she said to him. She turned to Euryclea. "Have the maids fetch the bed from our bridal chamber and make it up." "What do you mean?" Odysseus said angrily. "It's not possible to move my bed. I built it myself around an old olive tree and used the tree's trunk for the bedpost. Unless someone has cut through the trunk, the bed cannot be taken out of the room." And then Penelope knew that this was indeed Odysseus, and she ran into his arms. Outside, the night air echoed with the twittering of the suitors' souls as they journeyed down to Hades. Wise Athena gave Odysseus back his own appearance, and Penelope's happiness was complete. Penelope and Odysseus embraced in the fire's glow, and their troubles at an end. Their troubles at an end. Their troubles at an end, finally. Now Odysseus's long wanderings were over, and he was at peace with the gods at last. Thank you all for watching. This was quite the Odyssey ourselves, just to read through this, but I hope it was mostly